And welcome to the top 8 of Grand Prix Charleston 2012. We have Brian Eason playing against Pat Cox. Brian on the left, Pat on the right. I'm Ben Swartz, joined here in the booth by Marshall Sutcliffe. Hi, Marshall.
Hey, Ben, and we're right after the races. Let's get to commentating here.
Looks like turn 1, Brian has started things off with an Arbor Elf. Pat Cox has a turn 2 Augur of Bolas. Didn't get a chance to see what that Augur got, but a quick turn 2 Lingering Souls for Brian Eason, giving him 2 1/1 Spirit tokens, something we've seen all tournament.
This is really an ideal start for Brian Eason here. He's already got 3 creatures out, and 2 of them happen to be tokens as well. And Pat Cox has mustered an Augur of Bolas, which really isn't going to do much for a while here.
Pat Cox does not have a play on turn 3, and he passes it back to Brian Eason, who is looking at cards in his hand. He's got quite a few. I see a Collective Blessing, a Garruk Primal Hunter, along with an Avacyn's Pilgrim and an Ultimate Price. He's going to quickly get in for 2 damage with his 2 1/1 Flying Spirit tokens. Post-combat, let's see what he ends up casting. 4 mana at his disposal. He's going to flash back Lingering Souls.
Graveyards.
Get 2 more 1/1 Flying Spirit tokens. And likely play that Arbor Elf by untapping his Temple Garden. Maybe he's afraid of a Supreme Verdict, although he should know what's in Patrick Cox's list, right?
That's right. They did get a chance to look at each other's deck lists. We're trying to get the players moved over a bit here so that they're centered on screen. We need to be able to see Patrick Cox's graveyard. It's very, very important for his deck.
Both players' graveyards are important to see.
That's right. And it looks like Pat just doesn't have one yet. He's going to...
Yeah, so Brian's going to cast that Avacyn's Pilgrim and pass the turn back to Pat Cox. End of turn, Pat is going to cycle his Azorius Charm just to draw a card. And go to Pat's turn. So, if you're the blue-white tempo deck here, what are you trying to do against this army, the sea of tokens that Brian Eason
This is actually
created?
just a very big problem, I think, for Pat Cox's deck. I mean, he doesn't have main deck sweepers. He has some spot removal, some things like Azorius Charm and Unsummon that he can use to pick off creatures, but just making a big army of huge creatures is going to be pretty tough for Pat Cox's deck to deal with.
Yeah, we see no play for Pat Cox. It's likely he's got a Restoration Angel here, which is what he has. He's going to be able to... Oh, yeah, he's going to be able to blink the Augur of Bolas, get another card.
Actually, and I'm looking at the list, and I do see that Pat Cox is running 1 Supreme Verdict in the main.
Wow.
So he does have access to that.
So he's going to get a rewind off the Augur of Bolas. He's going to block one of the tokens with his Restoration Angel. Interesting, Brian didn't want to pull the trigger on Ultimate Pricing.
Is that a Collective Blessing?
Yeah, so he waited for Brian Eason or for Patrick Cox to tap out to cast the Restoration Angel during combat, and then post combat he casts Collective Blessing.
Very calmly slams a Collective Blessing, which is going to give all his creatures +3/+3. Now, again, Patrick Cox does have though 1 Supreme Verdict main. That is not normal. I'm looking at Jerry Thompson's list. He doesn't have that.
Does he have a way to remove a Collective Blessing that's in play?
Let's take a look at that. Also, one thing to note here is that Pat Cox needs a second white source in order to cast a Supreme Verdict anyway, and I don't think he has it in his hand yet. And right now, I mean, is he just facing lethal here?
3, 6,
Probably not,
9,
but that is huge.
12, 15. If Brian Eason can get rid of both of Pat Cox's blockers, that's 15 damage on the board. Or it's more than 15.
It's more than that. They're all 4/4s.
16, 20 damage, yeah.
Yeah. The full 20, and he's just going to bash with everybody. And all of a sudden, Pat Cox is it looks like he's just going to get ran over in this game. I mean, again, an Unsummon and a Snapcaster Mage can go so far about taking out some tokens, but, even that combo only takes out half a card of Brian Eason's.
If Pat Cox doesn't have any spell here, Brian Eason can activate Gavney Township, make all of his guys 5/5s, but Pat does have Restoration Angel to barely stay alive.
He's going to take a look. Now, is he going to find a Supreme Verdict? Because he will be alive after this turn, but he won't have anything left. No creatures left.
Azorius Charm.
Azorius Charm, and he can't cycle it this turn either, so that is just going to be in his hand. And again, he's down a white mana source here, so even if he draws Supreme Verdict, I don't think he can cast it. So unless he has a white mana source in his hand still, I think that is going to do it.
So Pat goes to blocks. He's facing down 8 damage Brian Easton can also activate his Gavany Township.
I don't see any way in Pat Cox's deck to deal with the Collective Blessing.
So if Brian Easton activates Gavany Township here, his guys become 5/5s. Pat falls to 5 life and still has 5 5/5s in play. So that's what he's going to do. Activate Gavany Township, give all of his creatures a +1/+1 counter. All of Pat Cox's creatures die.
And this is just a very dire situation for Pat Cox. Of course, Brian Easton has no pressure on him at all. He doesn't have to commit anything else to the board. He just has to say, show me something pretty good.
Yeah, Supreme Verdict or no.
And he needs to go white mana source untapped Supreme Verdict in order to make that happen. Certainly not impossible, but he doesn't have the ability to cycle that Azorius Charm. You know, he could have something like a... I mean, he's going to do it anyway, but that was one of his white sources for the turn, and he's just going to scoop it up.
Brian Easton takes game 1 of his top 8 match against Patrick Cox here at Grand Prix Charleston 2012.
Man, that was a beating.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things about these tempo-based blue decks is that it can be hard for them to catch up, you know, once they fall behind. Now, they can certainly use Unsummon and that kind of a card to get back from situations where they're down to like a big creature or a single big threat. But we saw, what, 5 creatures on the board, and they were all 4/4s or 5/5s by the time they were attacking. Like, it's really tough to deal with for a blue-white deck.
That was something we saw late in the Delver season, when Delver was a dominant deck in Standard, that a couple people, including some of the SCG Black people, were trying to put white in it so they could play Lingering Souls in their Delver decks, and that was their way of going over the top in the mirror, right?
Yes.
By casting Lingering Souls, they were able to get so many more creatures and generate an advantage that way. And that's something we see. It's sort of the similar match. We've got Lingering Souls on one side, and we've got Delver on the other side, and a Delverish deck, a blue-white tempo deck.
We use that term to describe a deck type now, even though this
we're
particular
trying not to
one,
because it has no Delver. But
right. Now let's take a look at the sideboards here. Pat Cox has 2 more Supreme Verdicts in the board to complement the one that he has already in the main deck. He's got 3 Rest in Peace, but that does a pretty good job on his deck. Although I have to say that he's got 1 Talrand Sky Summoner main, and he's got 2 more on the board. And you know, I know he's really had a good time with that card recently. It's been performing very well for him this weekend. Although, you know, this is going to become very much, you know, we saw Jerry Thompson in one of the earlier rounds transition his blue-white deck into a control deck, you know, a creature-type control deck where he can play Supreme Verdict and Sphinx's Revelation and control the board. And that's what Pat Cox is going to need to do here, but he's going to be facing some pretty tough threats to deal with in the form of Lingering Souls, Intangible Virtues, which he can't really deal with.
Yeah.
Detention Sphere, he has 1 Detention Sphere in the board.
Okay, so we've got some results.
It looks like the only way he can deal with it.
It looks like Peter Kelly is up 1 game over Reed Duke, and John Bolding is up 1 game over Morgan Chang in the other matches.
Okay.
Thank you, Ray, our producer, our second producer there.
Yeah, this is going to be a really tough one, I think, for Pat Cox. You know, his deck tries to rely on just sort of maintaining a board presence for the board state for as long as possible, preferably with just nothing on it, until he can start grinding out advantage from Moorland Haunt, and eventually his big finisher is Runechanter's Pike. As it stands, his main defense against most things is a suite of counter spells, and those are going to be probably less effective versus his opponent here, as you know, things like Lingering Souls, you're like, yeah, sure, rewind it, whatever, you know.
Definitely an interesting deck that Brian Easton has.
One of the cards that, where did it go? There it is. 3 Midnight Haunting we see from Brian Easton, and I think that's a pretty interesting one in the sense that, you know, Pat Cox is really trying to play a deck where he gets to dictate when and how he casts his spells, whether it's on your end step or when you've tapped out, and he gets to hold up counter magic for the rest of the time. And, you know, Brian Easton has the opportunity with 3 Midnight Haunting in his deck for Pat Cox to say, okay, go.
Yeah.
And Brian Easton can say Midnight Haunting. And that's a threat that Pat Cox has to respect. And if he counters it, Brian Easton can often untap and have free reign to resolve whatever it is that he feels is best. So it's going to be a tool that's going to be tough for Pat Cox to deal with. You know, Lingering Souls being a sorcery means that Pat Cox, it kind of plays into his strategy. He can say Dissipate it or whatever. And if Brian just passes a turn back, he can cast something with Flash. So Yeah, I think Brian Eason's a fairly big favorite here, to be honest.
I think so too. I think that the things that Pat can bring in from the board, the Supreme Verdicts, don't and Detention Sphere don't do as much as Brian Eason's board cards, which include the rest in pieces you were talking about earlier. Another ultimate price, some more planeswalkers. Interesting card in Brian Eason's deck. I don't think it makes very much difference. Here is Slayer of the Wicked. Have you seen that card recently?
Not since I've drafted it every single time I opened it.
Yeah, it's an Innistrad card that, when it comes to play, destroys target zombie or
werewolf or
vampire.
Yeah. So, yep, that's an interesting one. He's also got an Intrepid hero. I've seen a few of those floating around out here as well. But one of the things that I'm noticing about this blue-white flash deck in comparison to the older Delver decks is that Delver was a one-drop that could create a ton of pressure on its own. This deck has nothing of the sort.
Yeah.
It does not pressure its opponent at all in the early stages of the game. The most it'll usually do is play something like an Augur of Bolas, and that just doesn't apply any reasonable amount of pressure to your opponent. So this definitely has a different feel to it than those decks did. All right.
Players are drawing their opening hands for the second game of their top 8 match.
Got the Han Solo sleeves over there for Pat Cox.
Looks like Pat has kept his hand. Brian Eason making a decision. And play has started. Island go for Pat. Eason, on the other hand, is a turn 1 Avacyn's Pilgrim.
It's going to be important here to power out some early threats, and he's just going to say go. Does he have Lingering Souls on turn 2?
Well, he's going to take 2 from his Overgrown Tomb.
He's going to use up all his mana this turn. Let's see what it is.
Yep,
it
Lingering
is in fact
Souls.
Lingering Souls. And this is in under a Dissipate. Sure, Pat Cox can negate it or something, but that just isn't going to get him anywhere, so he just lets it resolve. Draws a card for the turn. Lingering Souls, very powerful.
Yeah, Pat just
in this type of matchup.
Plays his 3rd land and says go. Brian has to be careful of a Supreme Verdict, right?
That's right. He doesn't want to overextend too much, but when you can use cards in tandem like Lingering Souls and Intangible Virtue, you can, that's only 2 cards out of your hand, and it creates enough pressure that it has to be Supreme Verdicted eventually. And, then you're just one more Lingering Souls away from reinstituting that pressure almost immediately.
So Brian Eason gets into the red zone with 2 Spirit Tokens and an Avacyn's Pilgrim. Let's see if Pat Cox wants to play like a Snapcaster Mage, which is what he does, to block the Avacyn's Pilgrim.
All right, so he's going to take his opponent, Brian Eason, off of white mana, potentially, although, Brian still has a land drop to hit here. So if he just plays something that produces white mana.
Well, now Brian has to think. He can also, if he doesn't have a land that produces white mana, he can flashback that Lingering Souls this turn. Maybe he wants to play another Avacyn's Pilgrim, which is what he does.
Does he have a land drop? He does, but he actually doesn't want to flashback Lingering Souls this turn. He just plays a Temple Garden tapped.
So why might that be?
I'm not sure. It feels like you just want to go ahead and get the other Lingering Souls on there. Yeah, that's a dangerous play. Now he's drawn an Intangible Virtue, which would have been pretty sweet with 4 Lingering Souls tokens. Now, we don't know if Pat Cox has brought in his Rest in Pieces. He's got 3 of them. It does hurt his deck pretty badly too, but I'm assuming he can make sideboard adjustments to compensate for that. Looks like he's going to attack first. Again, he's trying to draw out a Restoration Angel so that he can resolve a key spell in his deck, which is an Intangible Virtue. Also, Pat Cox doesn't really have a way to deal with it outside of like a Detention Sphere. He's got just 1 of those, I believe.
So Brian Eason plays a land untapped and says go, just giving a gigantic signal that he's got Restoration Angel in hand. End of turn, a Thought Scour comes out for Pat Cox. So you have a second play at end of turn. Does not look like it. He's going to untap and go to his first main phase.
Again, that Lingering Souls is just hanging out in Brian Eason's deck, and Brian Eason says, okay, I can play this game too. And it gets rewound, which is a key one here, because the fact that it has rewind means that Patrick Cox still gets to keep up counter magic. Big counter spell there for Pat Cox, although he is still facing down some amount of pressure here. At some point, Brian Eason's going to have to decide when he wants to try to fire off that Intangible Virtue, also when he wants to flashback that Lingering Souls. That's why I kind of like doing it earlier, because the Lingering Souls on its own creates enough pressure.
Yeah.
And then the Intangible Virtue becomes kind of optional, where if you get it countered, you kind of say, well, okay. right, so it looks like he is going to flash back Lingering Souls. Does that resolve Pat Cox? He's got to decide, because if it does, that is going to be 5 power on the board, and that's going to leave Pat Cox dead in just 3 short turns, and that's if Brian Eason does nothing else.
Brian Eason's going to take another 2 from his lands, leaving 3 up.
And what is he going to cast this turn? He's got
Midnight
3 mana.
Hunting.
You think he's going to pass a turn and then just leave it up?
Yeah. End of turn.
You're totally right.
Pat's going to cast Sphinx's Revelation for 2. Does Eason want to respond to this?
Probably not. You know, he's digging for a Supreme Verdict, and he doesn't want to play right into that. If Pat Cox does play a Supreme Verdict on his turn, Brian Eason can end step Midnight Haunting and then slam that Intangible Virtue and try to get in there for 4 damage.
So it's Pat Cox's turn here. Does he have a Supreme Verdict?
He does have a Moreland Haunt, so that at least currently can help him start grinding down those tokens, but also if the Intangible Virtue ends up resolving, that's going to change that. So Brian Eason did not pull the trigger on the Midnight Haunting. Again, he wants to have a replay plan for in case he gets wrathed.
But he does have Vault of the Archangel. He's going to play that and then attack for 5. If Patrick Cox decides to play a Restoration Angel here, it will likely die to Vault of the Archangel, but he just takes it, goes down to 9 life.
He's got, and Brian Eason has Ultimate Price, Intangible Virtue, and I believe
Lingering
that is
Souls.
it's a
it's
Lingering Souls. Is it Midnight Hunter or Lingering Souls? That is the question.
I'm pretty sure that's Lingering Souls.
Okay. And doesn't want to pull the trigger on that. Detention Sphere gets all of the tokens. You know, Brian Eason has to be aware of that, but he did get a chance to look at Pat Cox's deck, remember, and he's only got 1. So, you know, how much do you play around a Detention Sphere there? I mean, I don't think you can really do too much there. All right, so he's going to play another Sphinx's Revelation. That's going to draw him 3 cards here and gain him 3 life. So he's keeping the momentum going forward in a very big way for Pat Cox. Even though he is facing a reasonable amount of pressure here, he's able to keep kind of mitigating the damage that he's taking each turn and also just going right through his deck, drawing a bunch of cards.
So on Pat Cox's turn, he's going to pay 3 and cast Detention Sphere, the card you were talking about.
There's the one of Detention Sphere, and it's going to target a Spirit token, and he is going to Ultimate Price his own Spirit token in response to the trigger. That means that the other ones are going to live. Now, does it resolve is the question. Brian Eason was expecting this, and he had the Ultimate Price. He knew how this worked, and he was ready for it. The question is, does it stick? No, it looks like a Dissipate is going to hit that Ultimate Price, and that exiles it, and sure enough, the tokens are gone. But
so an update from the floor. Reed Duke has evened the matchup 1 game apiece against Peter Kelly, and it looks like what Brian Eason here is going to do is, since now Patrick Cox is tapped out, he's going to cast Intangible Virtue, cast Lingering Souls, and flash it back if he's got the mana, which he does.
Yeah, this is going to be a big turn for him. He also has the opportunity to get in for 1 damage. Oh, it looks like he's going to go with a Borderland Ranger.
Okay. Drew that for the turn.
Yeah. So he's got to make sure that he gets the Intangible Virtue online under the counter magic. Also, with that Detention Sphere out of the way, he should know now that that his Intangible Virtue is basically untouchable. So it looks like he can go Lingering Souls and Intangible Virtue here and have a nice board state. He does play the Virtue, and there's the Lingering Souls, 2 tokens, and he's going to pass the turn back. So a very nice recovery plan for Brian Eason. He's looking pretty good to keep a bunch of pressure going here, and I wouldn't be too shocked to see a Wrath here. All right, looks like Augur of Bolas is going to dig for 1 because Pat Cox must not have 1 on hand. He probably wouldn't want to just throw that Augur out there first, so he keeps a negate.
That's really good.
That seems like good news if you're sitting in Brian Eason's seat. Eason is up a game here in the top 8 in Charleston. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Ben Schwartz. We are looking at game 2 here between Brian Eason and Pat Cox, and
one of the matches sounds like it's finished. We hear some clapping over in the feature match area.
That usually means something has ended over there. And sure enough, Brian Easton does get to untap. Now he's aware of the negate that is in Patrick Cox's hand. It could be used if he decides to flashback Lingering Souls at some point, but for now I think he's just going to attack with everything. Did Jerry win his
Jerry
round?
Thompson. Jerry Thompson.
You better go check. We don't want to tell you something wrong.
We're waiting on the results of that match.
All right, let's take a look at here. It said Restoration Angel is going to target Augur of Bolas, and it's going to reveal an Essence Scatter. It looks like Patrick Cox still hasn't been able to find a Supreme Verdict.
So it looks like the result of that match was that Matt Keene defeated Jerry Thompson 2-1.
Jerry told me before the top 8 started that he felt like there was a lot of bad matchups there for him, and maybe that was one of them. We didn't know at the time who he was going to be playing against.
So Brian Easton gets in, a little bloodbath happens. Pat looks like he's taking 4 here, down to 6. And Brian Easton is going to pass the turn back.
And again, the digging continues. Sees the towel round, but I guess he still hasn't seen a sweeper here, although he does have the board relatively whittled down. Patrick Cox is still sitting at a lowly 6 life. He's
another Augur.
Another Augur. He's seen so many cards from his deck. Can he find a Wrath here? Maybe just an unsummon or something? I don't know if he would take those out versus his deck, but it does kill a token, and that's certainly what he'd like to do here.
So you got another Thought Scour off that Augur of Bolas. Let's see if he wants to cast that now to try to cast a sorcery, a non-instant, non-flash spell this turn. He also has that Moorland Haunt online, which will start generating some tokens, but they will be nothing in the face of the Intangible Virtue, pumping up Brian's tokens and giving them Vigilance.
Yeah, the real question here is how many more tokens. All right, now there's a Supreme Verdict. He finally hit one.
Okay.
So Pat Cox now has that sitting in his hand. He has enough mana to cast it right now if he'd like as well. He'd lose his Augurs, but he would also take care of that pesky Spirit token that's threatening to kill him in 3 turns. He might want to wait on it, though, if he thinks that Brian Easton is going to be impatient. I mean, it's not like he can kill him right away, so he might want to just sit back on it.
I mean, he can
pass the turn back, and he can
create tokens with Moorland Haunt to chump block it for a number of turns. So.
Okay, so he's actually fairly stabilized here. Kind of forces Brian Easton to actually flash back that Lingering Souls that he's got in his graveyard still. Of course, the more in that direction that Brian Easton goes, the more it benefits the Supreme Verdict in Patrick Cox's hand.
So Brian Easton is going to enter the red zone with his 2/2 Vigilance Spirit token.
Now we know that Pat Cox has a negate in hand. He had to reveal it, so you know he can prevent that from happening if that's what he wants to do.
But it seems as if he just took the 2 damage, and Lingering Souls comes down.
So again, Brian Easton's basically forced to do this, as Pat Cox can deal with the 1 Spirit token kind of indefinitely by using his Moorland Haunt if he so wishes. So right now it's like, yeah, that's going to resolve. And what that means is that Pat Cox is just, he's like, okay, we're going to be wrathing then.
Yep. Thought Scour at end of turn. Mill draw from Pat Cox.
You can see his graveyard is coming all the way over onto the battlefield now, but he's got to be able to look at it and have access to it.
So now Pat's got to almost definitely cast that Supreme Verdict, right?
Yeah, I mean he had to flash back or play a Lingering Souls in order to increase his clock there. And he knows he's going to get Supreme Verdicted, but he didn't have a choice. He has to represent lethal damage, or else Pat Cox can just sit there and he's going to have infinite time. The longer the game goes, the more it should benefit Pat Cox. I mean, it looks like Brian Easton's now going to have to rebuild his board. We know he's going to have to flash back or cast another Lingering Souls. He's probably going to get at least one of them negated, maybe even more.
Gavany Township drawn for Brian Eason to go along with his Arbor Elf. So he's going to flash back Lingering Souls, as you said. Almost definitely. That's going to get negated. And then is he going to cast...
He's just going to flash back his other one here.
That also going to get negated? No, it will not.
So that one resolves. So he does have lethal on the board right now, but Patrick Cox has seen a lot of cards from his deck. We don't get a chance to look at his hand right now, but...
He's also going to throw down that Arbor Elf, because he does have that Gavany Township in hand, and the Vault of the Archangel. Having more creatures out is more advantageous for him. Oh, but the Arbor Elf is going to get Essence Scatter.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like he doesn't have that many targets for Essence Scatter, so he wants to use it while he sees one.
Sure. Yeah, there really are very few. Just Thragtusk and Arbor Elf and Avacyn's Pilgrim. So back to Pat Cox's turn. Does he have something to do to deal with these Spirit Tokens?
He does indeed. A second Supreme Verdict is going to wipe the board once again for Pat Cox, and he's going to follow up with an Augur of Bullets. Now, he hasn't seen a Runechanter's Pike yet, but you got to imagine it's going to be massive when he does finally hit one. He gets a rewind off of the Augur. I think he's only got the 3 lands available, though, so he cannot cast it currently, but he's still got a grip.
But Brian Eason was out of cards. He just had the Gavany Township going into this turn. Let's see if he drew something spicy.
So even though Patrick Cox is sitting at 4 life, ooh.
Garruk Primal Hunter for Brian Eason.
Does this resolve?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a pretty big game. He's going to start pumping out 4/4 tokens once every turn. And all of a sudden, Pat Cox is going to need to find a Runechanter's Pike. He can put pressure on Garruk, no problem, with the 1/1 Spirit tokens he's going to be making off of the Moorland Haunt. But, you know, Garrick's going to be making 4/4s at the same pace that he's going to be losing loyalty counters.
Yeah, so does Pat have that Runechanter's Pike?
Like, it looks like he doesn't, because he is just going to send into Garruk for 1. Brian Eason also has the opportunity next turn to -3 on Garruk and draw 4 cards, but the problem that presents is that if Pat Cox can like unsummon the token or something, then he's going to get nothing out of it. So probably going to want to be patient and wait on that one. Also, he can just leave Garruk and play forever, just keep making tokens until Pat Cox comes up with some way to deal with it.
Man, this seems like Pat needs something really quick, or else Eason's Garruk here is just going to take over the game. So we've got another result. Peter Kelly defeats Reed Duke here in the top 8 of Grand Prix Charleston.
Pretty surprised by that. That green-white aggro deck does seem to be pretty resilient, but it looked like the Bant list had all the tools to beat it.
From Twitter, AJ mentions that in Game 3, Reed kept his opening hand, and his opponent mulliganed to 4 cards, which were land and triple Rancor, and drew Fencing Ace off the top of his deck.
Oh my goodness. Are you serious? And then just suited it up and got there?
Drew another land, and then...
It's incredible.
So Dissipate here to come off of the Augur of Bolas, which flickered into play thanks to the Restoration Angel at end of turn. And now Pat is attacking both of his creatures to Garruk, so Garruk bites the dust.
And on end step, he's going to activate his Gavany Township. It looks like he's drawn another Lingering Souls.
Yep.
So attack for 5.
Azorius Charm your token.
And that just kills that token. So Pat Cox seems to have all the answers currently. Oh, maybe that was a Midnight Haunting, because he just passed the turn back.
Okay.
You know, there's no point in waiting here.
Pat Cox draws.
Again, looking for that Runechanter's Pike to finally get in these huge hits of damage that the deck can do. It looks like he's swung the tides pretty firmly in his favor. Now, if this is... Oh, it's not. What does he have? I thought he had a Lingering Souls then.
I thought he did have a Lingering Soul too, but...
He just decided not to cast it. He's going to play an Arbor Elf.
He doesn't want to cast it into Rewind, but... Now he's going to cast it. Yeah, Lingering Souls. Pat's going to Rewind. He knows that that's there, thanks to the Augur of Bolas.
But that's nothing he could have done about that, so instead he could still just gets to flash it back.
Pat says that's okay. Oh, no, it gets dissipated.
It gets dissipated second time.
Why didn't he just dissipate it the first time?
I do not know. Seems like keeping that Rewind intact would be pretty sweet.
So Pat untaps. He's got 3 1/1 Spear tokens, an Augur of Bolas, and a Restoration Angel. He's going to attack in with the team. Brian takes 6, goes down to 9 life. And Pat passes the turn. Brian here, counting up his lands.
Yeah, he's looking like he's quite up against it here. I mean, he drew a Sorin, but it looks like Pat Cox has got... Oh, actually, that is not a negate. It's a Think Twice. He's going to flash it back. Does he find a counterspell for Sorin? Brian Eason sitting at 9.
No.
He does not. All right, so Sorin gets to make a 1/1 lifelinking vampire.
And Pat Cox continues to make 1/1 Spirit tokens with Moorland Haunt.
He is mounting quite the offensive here. And it's looking pretty good for Pat Cox. I don't see how Brian Eason can really get that token through anytime soon. Pat has a whole lot of creatures now.
Yeah, so Pat's going to send all but one in of the tokens into the red zone, or maybe all of them, or just one of them. Brian Eason has both Gavany Township and Vault of the Archangel up. 2 of those utility lands from Innistrad block. So Brian's going to attack in with everybody.
Patrick is, right?
Or Patrick, yeah. He's going to kill that Sorin with the Restoration Angel on one of the tokens and deal 3 to Brian, dropping him down to 6.
He's going to play Talran Sky Summoner. That's going to give him another blocker on the ground. He also has Moorland Haunt activation available. I'm assuming that there's still creatures left in his yard, although I can't actually tell from here.
Okay, Brian Eason, this is your last turn. Do you have something?
Looks like we're going to be seeing a game 3.
Okay, so Brian attacks in. Pat Cox at 4, so he's going to have to block off with some of his guys, but... And Brian Eason is also going to be able to activate Vault of the Archangel to gain some life, but is that going to be enough? He gains 4 life, goes to 10. He's facing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 damage. Barely enough.
We see Patrick Cox doing the math here, trying to sort out if he needs to block both and how this is actually going to work out for him. Right, so he's going to make a token. He did have another Snapcaster Mage hiding in his graveyard there.
So now is he going to use that token to block the Sorin token? Pat doesn't want to make a mistake here. There's a lot of line. This is the top 8 of Grand Prix Charleston. Figuring out the optimal block. if he blocks with the Augur of Bolas and the Spear token, that will leave him with a 2/2 Tolerant. And it looks like that's what he's going to do. Is he going
to double block on the 3/3 Vampire token?
I mean, if he does that, then Gavany Township can just get activated. And Pat loses a token and a Talrand to a guy that's just going to stay alive.
This feels like Pat Cox is just making sure that he doesn't lose the game.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he seems to have it in hand pretty well here, and he's just playing around everything just to make sure that he doesn't.
He's in a little trouble. He's going to have to keep guys back because he's at 4 life, right? So.
And Brian Eason's going to go to 11 here.
Yeah.
Or maybe more.
I believe Brian Easton's 1 mana short of activating both of his lands, both Fall to the Archangel and Gavany Township. Pat Cox still thinking, pondering about this block. What is he going to decide? He's counting it up, thinking a couple turns in advance.
I guess so. Maybe 5 turns in advance.
Yeah, well. Will the game
taking his time here for sure.
Even be going on in 5 turns?
Not if he figures it out. This is usually where the judge says, "I need you to make a play."
or get the coverage guys a cup of coffee. Okay, Pat, what are you going to do?
He's going back to the math drawing board. See him tapping on the table, counting.
Han Solo looking at him, giving him a stare.
Okay, it looks like we have a decision.
Okay, finally, Pat Cox.
He is going to block everybody on the Vampire token there. All of his available creatures, an Augur of Bolas, a Tolerant Sky Summoner, and a 1/1 Flying Spirit token. That means that he could take up to 3 damage here from the Arbor Elf, dropping Pat Cox down to 1.
Now Brian is going to take a look at Pat Cox's graveyard, which is quite large.
He probably needs to see how many instants and sorceries are there in case he gets drawn.
So he passes that back to Pat, and he's going to order the blockers 1, 2, 3. First the Talrand, 2 the Augur of Bolas, and 3 the token.
And is he going to go ahead, and so he's got to decide if he wants to use his township or
the Vault of the Archangel.
Or the
so if he uses the Vault of the Archangel, all 3 of Pat's creatures die.
Yeah, and he'll also gain, let's see, that's 3, just gain 5 life here. Looks like that's what he's going to do. This way he only has to do 1 damage to each of the creatures, which is what he's telling Pat right now. They all die.
He's going to gain 5 life?
Actually, but he didn't get to pump his guy. It's 3/3 though, right? So
yeah,
he should
3 plus 2.
Well, he should get to kill that token then.
That token should be dead.
Yeah, it should be a dead token.
He only has to assign 1 damage to each.
Right, because of Death Touch.
But because
he has intangible virtue. Yeah, he had a +1/+1. So it didn't somehow. Pat Cox's token survive that?
Eason needs to say that he wants to kill all 3 creatures.
I mean, I saw him tap on the top with his pen. Was that not enough?
Not sure, but it's Pat's turn now. Pat on 2 life. Brian went back up to 11 life.
Okay, well, I guess he just gets to keep his tokens. For some reason, that Detention Sphere is right in the middle of all the tokens, but he does have a Restoration Angel to complement his 5 tokens. And is he going to play a Pike here?
It's off screen.
It's off screen. It's probably a Pike. It's costing 2, and he's paying 2 again. I can't tell though.
Yep, and it had to have been a Pike.
It must have been a Pike. We can't quite see it, but it had to be because he started to go for his graveyard to count it up, and we see that Brian Eason scoops it up. So we're going to get a Game 3 decider here. in the quarterfinals of Grand Prix Charleston. If you're just joining this, I'm Marshall Sutcliffe, and I'm joined in the booth by Ben Swartz, and we are looking at Pat Cox versus Brian Eason here. Brian Eason got off to a very quick start and was able to apply a reasonable amount of pressure, but Pat Cox was digging through his deck furiously to try to find a supreme verdict. He ended up finding 2 of them.
Yeah. He dug through like 3/4 of his deck, right?
Yeah, he was able to set up the victory there.
So back to the bracket. We've got 2 results in. Peter Kelly defeated Reed Duke. Peter Kelly piloting the green-white aggro deck. He'll face off against the winner of the match we're watching right now, Brian Eason versus Pat Cox. On the opposite side of the bracket, Jerry Thompson fell to Matt Keene's black-red aggro deck. Matt Keene is going to play against the winner of John Bolding versus Morgan Chang. Either a black-red aggro mirror match or against the 4-color reanimator deck. We're still waiting for those results. But there we get a look at the feature match area. You see in the back corner, Morgan Chang playing his match. And the match we're watching, Brian Eason versus Pat Cox. You see our floor reporter, Ray Punzalan, watching Punzalan
watching from the background, and you get Steve Sadin and JVL there doing text coverage. You see JVL's hands typing away there. Yes, that is him.
Thank you, Vanna.
Thank you, Rashad, for... Oh, it was like he looked over when you did that.
The players going back to their sideboards. What do you see? Are there any changes that you might make from cards that you saw if you were the other player? Or how
one of the cards that I was surprised to see from Pat Cox still in the deck was Essence Scatter. He's only got 2 in the main. Doesn't seem very good. It does hit some things. It's not a complete blank, but it doesn't seem like a very powerful spell versus Brian Eason's deck. Now, that being said, he might just not have had anything else to take out. You know, sometimes you bring in a certain amount of cards and you bring out the ones that don't matter at all. And sometimes the Essence Scatters do come in handy.
Okay, so we've got another result. Morgan Chang and John Bolding are going to a 3rd game, a decider. And we're going to get them moved over to the other camera match. So if their match is still going on after we finish watching Brian Eason and Pat Cox, we can flip over to that one.
It's definitely possible. John Bolding's playing the aggressive red and black deck.
Yep. Interesting to see if, as I said before, if John Bolding wins, he's going to face off against another red-black aggro deck. So players move over to our camera feature match, the place we've been watching all day.
It looks like Pat Cox had to step away for a minute here.
And
so we'll just wait for him a little bit until he comes back so that we can watch the rest of his match here.
So let's take, while we're waiting, let's look at John Bolding versus Morgan Chang. That matchup, look at their deck lists. They're going to a game 3. As I said before, that's black-red aggro versus the 4-color reanimator deck. And for Morgan Chang's deck, against the aggressive deck, the cards he's probably bringing in are what? Centaur Healer?
Yeah, for sure. He's only got 1, though.
Supreme Verdict?
Absolutely, all 3 Supreme Verdicts should come in.
Maybe Abrupt Decay?
Yeah.
John Bolding, on the other hand, what is he going to bring in?
Let's take a look. He's got 3 Bonfire to Dam, 3 Pillar of Flame, a Victim of Night, a couple of Cremates, the Cremates for sure. 2 Underworld Connections. I really like that card in Limited. I don't know how it plays out in Standard, but it's pretty sweet. Can definitely grind your opponent down. 2 Appetite for Brains, 2 Zealous Conscripts. Well, the Zealous Conscript seems like he wants those for sure. If he anticipates the game going really long, I guess he could bring in the Bonfires. The problem is that those aren't going to kill a ton of creatures on Morgan's side, so it's just really a burn spell to the face, and it's not the most efficient version of that unless you miracle it. So that probably isn't going to come in. A Victim of Night, yes. Kill your Angel, seems good. Yeah, I'd bring in 2 Cremates, Victim of Night, maybe Underworld Connections if he sees this being particularly grindy, the 2 Appetite for Brains, and the 2 Zealous Conscripts myself.
Okay. So both that match and the match we're watching, Pat Cox versus Brian Eason, are shuffling up for Game 3 on both of the matches. So.
All right. So Brian Eason, he should be on the play here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be really good for him because if he can get an intangible virtue in under counter magic, that's a big game for him. It really sets him up to have a sweet game because it just makes all of his lingering souls and midnight hauntings and anything that makes any tokens just very, very threatening. Can apply a lot of pressure to Patrick Cox and make him find those supreme verdicts as quickly as possible. And, you know, he's only got access to, let's see how many he has. I think he's only got 3 total. He's got access to 3 of them. And, you know, basically Brian Eason's deck can apply enough pressure that 3 of them just sometimes isn't enough.
Sure. So here we go, going to the deciding Game 3 between Brian Eason and Pat Cox here in the top 8 of Grand Prix Charleston 2012.
All right, so let's see if Brian can get off to a quick start. We know what Patrick Cox's game plan is here. We know what he's doing.
Wow. Okay, so the players are drawing their opening hands. Looks like no lands for Brian Eason. He quickly mulligans, and so does Pat Cox. So both players will be on 6 cards going into the deciding game of the quarterfinals.
Okay.
So, as we said before, the other match going on is Morgan Chang versus John Bolding, the red-black aggro deck, and Morgan Chang's 4-color reanimator deck.
Congratulations again to Martin Yuza for winning GP Bochum again.
2012, yeah. From the Czech Republic. He almost wasn't going to show up to the Grand Prix. He had his reservations last week. He said he was really tired. He's been traveling a lot. He wasn't sure if he was gonna make the trip to Bochum. He thought he might just take a week off, spend time with his family in Czech Republic. You know, he's still on the fence when he left Chicago.
Sure, he's not on the fence now.
Yeah, and just casually, calmly shows up, wins,
binks it. Yep.
Are we waiting on something? Okay. I thought a judge had picked up a deck or something.
Oop. Patrick Cox just took 7, and yeah, let's put 1 back. There we go.
Brian Eason points it out to his opponent.
Would you point it out to your opponent?
Yeah, of course. You wouldn't?
I don't believe you.
Why, because you wouldn't?
No, I would.
Okay. Turn 1, Avison Pilgrim for Brian Eason.
All right. So let's get down to the action here and see if he can find something. This is a big opening for him to resolve something. All he's doing is attacking. Does he have an intangible virtue maybe? Nope. Just going to be another Arbor Elf, or an Arbor Elf to add to the board here. So he's got a lot of mana available. But once Pat Cox plays a land here, it opens up, negate things like even Essence Scatter if he's going for a turn 3 Thrag Tusk or something like that.
Yeah, he does have a couple of planeswalkers in his hand that he can cast. 2 Sorens and a Garruk Primal Hunter, it looks like. So he's going to spend 4 mana, cast that Sorin, Garruk Relentless.
It was Garruk Relentless, so he's going to lead off with that and see if Pat Cox, he does not have the negate in hand, and boom, we already have a token coming in.
2/2 Wolf this time.
Yeah, it's a 2/2 Wolf token, and that's going to apply a lot of pressure to Pat Cox. Now, he does have ways to deal with this Garruk. Restoration Angel is a good way to flash in and then just kill it, because remember, this Garruk will not go up in loyalty until it becomes transformed, and thankfully the Restoration Angel just kills it. We see Brian Eason has drawn a Celestia Charm, and it looks like he's going to go right now. Now he's got to have a Dissipate. Okay, there's a Dissipate, but he doesn't mind because he does have another one in his hand that he's going to be able to play. I wonder if he was going to go for an Emblem right there, or if he was just going to start pumping out tokens.
Might want to. With no pressure from Pat Cox, he might have wanted to start with an Emblem. He could always just do the Emblem next turn and have another attacker. That's
yeah, it seems better. Yep.
Pat just plays his 4th land and says go. Is this where he really wants to be in the draw go?
I mean, this isn't the worst case scenario for Pat, but it's not good. He's facing down 6 power already. It's a 3-turn clock. And, you know, he's representing things like Rewind or Restoration Angel here. Restoration Angel would be very good, though. It will, however, tap Pat Cox out, and it will allow Brian to play Soren if he wants to do that.
So Brian Eason gets in with his 2 wolves. Interesting, he also has enough mana to activate that Vault of the Archangel if he chooses, but he's not going to do that. Pat is going to take 4, go to 7. And post-combat, what is Brian Eason going to play?
I mean, did you just pass the turn here? Like, is there, I mean, Pat Cox has all the cards that, he's only played 1 card this game that wasn't a land, and his deck is full of counter spells. Are you just expecting to get countered here? I mean, Pat Cox can just play the Angel post-combat if he wants, because it's going to prevent Brian from being able to do anything, and it looks like that's what he's going to do. So on end step, he's going to play it. Draw his card. That's going to kill Garrick.
Yep.
And if everything goes perfect for Pat Cox here, he can attack Garrick, kill Garrick, and then play Supreme Verdict, leaving Brian Eason with just 3 lands in play. See what the game plan is for Pat Cox.
Yeah, Moorland Hunt comes down. After combat, Pat is going to spend 2 mana on Rune Chanter's Pike.
And then he passes the turn back, so he's still representing that he has Dissipate in hand. He can also have Essence Scatter or Negate as well. All right.
So now if Brian Eason cracks in with all of his guys, that's 8 damage. If he wants to do that, put Pat Cox to 3. He's going to try to resolve a Sorin. And it does, and he's going to immediately give it an emblem.
And he can bring Pat Cox down to 1 with this attack here, right?
Yeah.
3, 6. No, actually, that's just lethal, isn't it? Because he made another wolf last time. So boom, just like that, Soren emblem and kill you. And Pat Cox extends the hand. Brian Eason takes him down, and he's going to move on to the semifinals here at Charleston.
So let's see if we can get a quick look at the other match. They're still playing.
Let's just get a good look at the other match.
John Bolding.
Let's just bring you the game 3 here is what I'm assuming.
Yeah, it is game 3.
Okay.
Versus Morgan Chang. John Bolding on the left, Morgan Chang on the right.
And we can see what's happened here. Morgan played a Centaur Healer and had it Searing Spirit, and he's facing down 4 power here.
Yeah, so must be that Morgan's taken a little bit of damage this game from that Knight of Infamy and Gravecrawler.
Oh yeah, he's probably taking a beating here.
Another Knight of Infamy. That's going to get in for 4.
Same amount of damage you get in for if you attacked with both anyway. Protection from white means it can't be Azorius Charmed. It can't get blocked by a Restoration Angel. So, looks like Chang is going to take it. Let's see if we can get an update on the life totals here. We don't know what Morgan was at the beginning of the turn. He's going to Forbidden Alchemy on end step here.
Okay.
So he's deciding what he wants to keep out of the 4 cards from Forbidden Alchemy.
John showing that he's got 3 cards in hand, while Morgan tanks on this key Forbidden Alchemy. He's going to discard Deathrite Shaman in 2 lands. Unclear what he got. He's holding his cards really closely to the chest. He'll untap. And draw.
All right, so clearly a Supreme Verdict would be awesome. I believe he's got one in his hand as well. And here it comes. There it is, Supreme Verdict. He's going to wipe the board and ship the turn back here. Now, what is John Bolding's, what's his makeup plan here? What does he do to get back in the game? That's going to be the question that we see here.
A Hell Rider in his hand and a Falcon Wrath Aristocrat.
And a Cremate.
Okay.
So those are 2 really, really good spells to get him right back on the attack plan. Now the life totals have been updated, and Morgan Chang is sitting at 8.
Okay.
So
not a lot.
It looks like he's going to just Cremate right now. And what is he going to target? The Centaur Healer. That's going to draw him a card as well.
Drew a Cackler, it looks like.
Okay, I don't think he's got another land here to be able to cast it, but he's got a draw step here. He did hit a land.
Thunder
and
Maw
that is a
Hellkite.
Thunder Maw Hellkite. It's going to crash in for 5. It's going to bring Morgan Chang all the way down to 3 life here. And it's going to represent lethal damage itself next turn. He's also got 2 other creatures.
That
At
both
least
have
one other
haste.
creature in hand that I think he's got a Falconmouth Aristocrat and something.
I thought Hellrider was the last card in his hand.
That might have been the Thunder Maw Hellkite, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But at any rate, he's got 2 lethal creatures, 1 in hand, 1 on the board for Morgan Chang to deal with here. And that's going to be really, really tough for Morgan to do. One of the things he could do, you know, was get back an Angel of Serenity. He doesn't have that option currently, and he is under a ton of pressure here.
3 mana. Morgan is going to cast
A Forbidden Alchemy, so he is desperately digging here. He doesn't, of course, know that John Bolding does have another hasty threat, so even if Morgan was to find an answer for the Thunder Maw Hellkite, he would still be dead. And I think this is probably going to do it for him. He's taking a look at his hand. He's taking a look at his Forbidden Alchemy cards. Can he find a way out of this mess? This Thunder Maw Hellkite dealing 5 at haste, and he cannot. He extends the hand, and you see John Bolding he's just elated there.
John Bolding advances to the semifinals.
As he moves on to the semis here at GP Charleston. Wow. Intense moments down the stretch there for sure.
There's your top 4. Peter Kelly facing off against Brian Eason, and John Bolding facing off against Matt Keane.
Now, one of the things we have to note